Welcome to Suffolk Matters, where all of Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News, opinions, and insights you won't hear anywhere else. Here's your host, the president of New York's largest independent union, Suffolk AME's Dan Levler.
Welcome to another edition of Suffolk Matters on Walk 97.5 and 94.3 The Shark, where Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. News and views you can't hear anywhere else. So my guest this morning is Peter Scully, Deputy County Executive, previous New York State DEC Regional Director. Good morning.
Good morning, Dan. It's good to be on. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's just get into, just out of the gate, let's talk about, your time at New York State DEC and what that role and responsibility was like.
Sure. So I've been very fortunate throughout my career to have opportunities to serve in government in a variety of executive positions, always with an environmental focus. I was honored to be appointed the regional director at DEC by then Governor Pataki in 2003, and to be retained in that position by three other governors, Governors Spitzer and Patterson and Governor Cuomo. But even before that, I was involved in local government, working to protect the environment and protect open space. I was the architect of the town of Brookhaven's initial open space program, and I continued working to protect open space throughout my career. And it was one of the things, obviously, that I was happy to be able to do again at DEC, using New York State Environmental Protection Fund monies to protect additional open space on Long Island, to protect groundwater, to protect surface waters, to protect wetlands, manage the wildlife resources on Long Island, and then obviously to work closely with local government officials to clean up the environment in situations where we had legacy impacts from industrial uses that were related to the defense industry presence that was so critical to the United States and the world in winning World War II. So we were still dealing with those legacy impacts on Long Island. Not the happiest thing to deal with, but managing those issues successfully with local governments was also a thrilling part of my work at DEC. And of course, working to support County Executive Ballone's efforts to reclaim our water and to protect Suffolk County water resources was also an important part of my work for the state of New York.
We hear a lot about the environment and why that's important. And, I know for myself, I can put this in context, but why is the environment so important, just generally for everyone?
Well, I think especially on an island surrounded by water, in which relies significantly on its tourism economy, protecting water resources so that people can enjoy the beaches, people can come and get on a boat and fish or shellfish. All of those opportunities have begun to slip away from us in recent years as a result of failure to address the need for wastewater treatment infrastructure. It's not a new issue. Suffolk County had focused and was warned in the late 1960s and early 1970s that allowing development to continue in this suburban community without providing for wastewater treatment would lead to situations where nitrogen impacts to groundwater and groundwater impacts to surface water would begin to degrade the water quality, contributing to beach closures and fish kills and closure of shellfish beds, and warnings to folks about eating too many finfish that they catch. All of those warnings have kind of have come to pass over the years, and so for that reason, prior to County Executive Alone's election, many of us in the environmental community were waiting for an elected official to come along who was willing to stand up and make water quality their top priority. And when County Executive Alone was elected in 2011, we found very quickly that he understood the critically important nature of the challenge of addressing the historical problem that resulted from the lack of active wastewater treatment. He was willing to take the lead in an historic effort to address it. And what we find ourselves with now is for the first time in Long Island history an alignment and consensus and a unified approach to dealing with water quality that involves not only elected officials, but the business community, organized labor, the building trades, and the environmental groups, all unified in an effort to finally and once and for all deal with the issues related to the fact that we're reliant on these primitive cesspools and septic systems, which really don't treat wastewater treatment at all. So it's a result of the county executive's leadership that we finally have everybody marching in the same direction on these issues.
It's very important. And, a geological feature of Long Island, I mean, you live on Long Island, you just know it, but the whole world isn't necessarily this way. We have a lot of sand and then sit on top of our aquifer. So water quality impacts everything, from the second it hits the ground to wherever it ends up, it's going to have an impact. And, I can remember in my younger days, high school era, so to speak, and it wasn't uncommon for people to think that it was perfectly fine to, do their oil change and just dump the oil on the ground. So we've come a long way in terms of just people generally understanding that the environment is important, and what we do today is going to have long-reaching effects many generations into the future. But it is, I think you make an excellent point. Having someone in a leadership position that understands how critical this is, and then making the right choice of aligning everybody to work on these issues, that really gets a lot more done than just different groups kind of clamoring to get someone's attention. To have someone that just understands and wants to implement these initiatives, I think is a benefit to the region.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And even as we were focused on these issues, and we were confronted with the unexpected challenges that were thrown at us related to COVID-19 and the pandemic. And the county executive earlier this year stepped up and recognized right away that in addition to the public health issues that were raised, that making a conscious decision to literally shut down the economy in order to protect public health was the right decision, save lives, prevent the spread of the disease to the extent possible. But he knew right away that there was going to be a significant cost to doing that. And what we're focused on right now is making sure that cost should not be borne by the essential workers and emergency responders who helped get us through the initial weeks of the pandemic, nor should it be borne by our local taxpayers.
Yeah, that's all of that is very important. First and foremost, to make the decision that human life takes precedence over revenue. That is not the same decision everyone made. You would think elected officials would immediately jump to that conclusion, but we're seeing the effects of, in certain parts of the country where, maybe the priority was the economy, and that's turning out to be a mistake in those regions. So, Long Island and New York in general, having the numbers that we have now, we had some really bad times, and, the future will be determined by our behavior today. Similarly to the environment, but at least in relation to COVID. But making that move to shut things down and prioritize human life, I think, that goes a long way to saying, what type of individuals are, in a position to make these decisions. So like I say, not everyone in every part of the country made the decisions or prioritized their decisions the same way.
And I agree. And County Executive Bellone recognized right away that this is kind of a multifaceted, multi-pronged event, that in addition to protecting public health and safety, which is the priority, we knew that shutting down the economy was going to have a significant impact on the business community, and he immediately established a small business advisory panel and a small business assistance program, trying to get ahead of that and help people through the pandemic. And he also recognized that at the end of the day, not just Suffolk County, but government on all levels was going to be placed in an untenable position as a result of revenue shortfalls caused directly by the pandemic. And you see it every day, the impact to the state of New York and other states, the impact to Nassau County, and, of course, the impact to Suffolk County. It's not a situation that's unique to Suffolk County, but certainly it is hitting hard in Suffolk County. And we know that this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We'll probably never see anything like it. It's a national emergency following guidelines of the Centers for Disease Control. And we know that this is a situation that requires federal relief. Federal relief to make states and local governments whole for the losses that they suffered as a direct result of the decision to shut down the economy. Federal relief will be critically important. We shut down the economy, as I said. We saved people's lives, but there's a cost to that. There's no way the cost of all these revenues that were lost should be borne by essential workers and local taxpayers. So we need a federal solution. We're fortunate on Long Island to have a hard-working and supportive congressional delegation, and we're hoping that Washington's going to come through. Meanwhile, there are things we can do on a local level that make a lot of sense to help close the revenue shortfall without having any impact on people who are requiring services, not having any impact on our workforce, and without having any negative impact on the business community or the environment.
Yeah, no, and those initiatives, it kind of brings us full circle. We were talking about, the importance of the environment, and that remains important no matter what. And we talk about the importance of revenue, to keep government services going through a crisis. And we talk about the importance of, shutting the economy down to protect human life. And all of those things coming together. A couple of suggestions made by the administration. Some work was done to put together a couple of resolutions that, why don't I let you explain, a couple of the initiatives rather than me trying to put it in my terms. I think you're probably better suited saying it yourself.
Well, sure. There's a great tradition in Suffolk County of placing ballot measures before the voters of the county and allowing them to decide. And as a result of that, the county actually has in place two separate funds, which are essentially tax stabilization funds, which are there to protect against significant increases in property taxes. And what we have observed is that, at least for the next several years, we know that the revenue shortfall, an independent panel of financial experts warned in Suffolk County alone, the shortfall could be between $1.1 and $1.5 billion. There are some common sense things that we can do to address the 3-year period that we face ahead of us. One of the tax stabilization funds that we have is called the Assessment Stabilization Reserve Fund. It was created for the specific purpose of mitigating increases in sewer taxes for homeowners who live within sewer districts in Suffolk County. Now, much of Suffolk County is not sewered, so the benefits of the Assessment Stabilization Reserve Fund is limited to those folks who are in sewer districts. But importantly, we know that the purpose of that fund is to make sure that sewer taxes don't increase any more than 3% each year. A clear goal approved by the voters. Limit increases in sewer taxes to 3% each year. We know that the amount of funding available in that fund is far in excess of what is required to keep sewer taxes stabilized. That money is sitting in that Assessment Stabilization Reserve Fund. It can be used for no other purpose than that, and it's sitting there unused at a time when we're facing massive shortfalls in revenue related to COVID. So what the ballot measure that the county executive has introduced would be to ask voters to decide whether or not we should use the excess funds in the Assessment Stabilization Reserve Fund to protect taxpayers from the financial impacts of COVID-19. This ballot measure, its introductory resolution 1414, recognizes that the Assessment Stabilization Reserve Fund continues to be funded well in excess of what is required to stabilize sewer rates. It recognizes that the excess fund balance sitting unused is of no benefit to taxpayers. It would ensure there's adequate funding to stabilize sewer tax rates moving forward, and it would not in any way affect our ongoing water quality programs and our efforts to protect the environment, which is very important. But the net benefit to taxpayers would be significant if the ballot measure is approved, it goes onto the ballot and is approved by the voters. we would see a net benefit of $27 million this year alone, protection against any reduction in services or increase in taxes that would result, and over the long term could save taxpayers as much as $150 million through 2029. That tweak to this existing tax stabilization reserve fund to allow it to be used to deal with the economic impacts associated with COVID-19 seems to us to make a lot of sense. That measure is pending before the Suffolk County Legislature, which will need to decide whether or not to approve a resolution that would allow the voters to decide.
Yeah, and Peter, that sounds to me like it's a bureaucratic measure. So basically the money's there, but the rule says you can't touch it. And now there's the need to touch that money. And so basically this proposal says we'll ask the taxpayer, rather than cutting services, rather than increasing taxes, can we just use excess funds that are not providing any function to anyone whatsoever to help us get through this crisis? I mean, it to me, that's fairly bureaucratic, right?
Yes, this is a purely bureaucratic measure. It has no negative impact on the environment, it has no negative impact at all on services, and it would not in any way affect the ability of this stabilization fund to control sewer taxes. So that, it's fairly clear that is a common sense local government measure that we can take here to show Washington and Albany that Suffolk County is doing what it can to address the problems caused by COVID-19. We're not simply relying on other levels of government to solve the entire problem, as much as we know that a federal solution is critically important for us to get this economy back on track.
Yeah.
The second measure would also tweak an existing tax stabilization fund. The other tax stabilization fund or taxpayer protection fund bill would change the way that we fund our open space program for a 3-year period. It would not eliminate or negatively impact open space funding or the environment. It simply would say for a 3-year period, we will increase funding for open space in our capital program, and while reducing the percentage of sales tax revenue that goes to the open space program for a 3-year period. If approved by the voters for this 3-year period, the amount of funding for open space under the sales tax side would be reduced by a certain percentage and replaced with capital funding. If for any reason the capital funding was not made available, either not approved by the legislature or wasn't funded, the original funding source would be restored. We've been working in good faith with legislators over the past several weeks to amend this bill to make them more comfortable with it, and make sure that our open space preservation program is completely protected. And because of those efforts, it's simply an indisputable fact that the legislation that's now pending before the legislature can't have any negative impact on the county's open space preservation program. The bill proposes temporarily replacing the current source of the county's funding for open space from sales tax to capital funds. As I said, if the capital funds are not adopted in the annual capital program, the original funding source is restored. If the capital funds are not bonded for any reason, the original funding source is restored. The county's open space preservation program is completely protected and will continue uninterrupted. That's a plain and simple truth, notwithstanding anything that you may hear. The bill doesn't ask our legislature to choose between protecting the environment and protecting taxpayers, but gives them the opportunity to do both of those things at the same time. It's a critical step towards addressing the financial disaster brought on by COVID-19, of which Suffolk County has been at the center. It's a completely painless, purely bureaucratic measure which will help begin addressing the catastrophic budget shortfall caused by COVID-19. There are other actions that are being discussed which will cause tremendous pain. Recently, the Suffolk County Legislature's nonpartisan Budget Review Office, well respected, in its report to the Legislature's Budget and Finance Committee, described some potential measures, including laying off 200 county employees, instituting a lag payroll, raising the home energy tax, raising the sales tax, and amortizing pension payments, all of which would amount to a fraction of the total projected shortfall. Now, these are the last things we should be doing, right?
I'm going to tell you right now, just so you know my position, no way, right? You know, when we have these bureaucratic measures that can be handled in this way, especially when you discuss open space. I mean, open space is something that you've spent your career on. That's your baby, so to speak. And to build this program in a way that it automatically explodes if the measures aren't met, if open space funding doesn't remain the same through this measure, then the thing actually blows up. I mean, that's a lot of protection to build into a ballot measure. But in terms of, cutting services in a time of crisis, laying people off, doing tax hikes, all of that stuff, I mean, you've got to explore every other option. I mean, these options sound like good options. They're not everything that's needed, but you start there, right? Before we start just hacking away at all of these much more painful solutions that would, frankly, yield much less in return.
Yeah, and, clearly we need federal relief. There's no question. You hear it from the governor. You hear it from county executive in Nassau and all local governments. We all know that federal relief is the key to getting this economy back on track. But there are things that we can do on the local level that don't impact employees and don't impact services and don't impact the environment. We should be taking these steps and doing these common sense measures. Otherwise, we're simply going to make the recovery that much more difficult and that much more painful moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just as a reminder to our listeners, if you're just tuning in, our guest this morning is Peter Scully, Deputy County Executive in Suffolk County. So, these measures to me, again, I'll just use the term that's, in my mind, these are no-brainers. This is a way to switch a mechanical piece of government, like the way something's written, to allow a bunch of money that would otherwise sit unused to be used in this crisis to help us weather the storm, so to speak, of the decision to prioritize human life over revenue. I mean, that's really, to me, that's how that whole thing boils down.
Right, and just important to note that with regard to the Taxpayer Protection Fund measure, that would temporarily change the way we fund open space, but not negatively impact it one iota. The ballot measure would automatically, if approved, return after 3 years the percentage of sales tax revenue going to the open space program to the pre-existing level. The voters are the only ones who have the right to make that change. If they approve this ballot measure, that percentage would instantly and automatically be restored at the end of the 3-year period. And letting the voters be heard, letting the voters decide is the purest form of democracy. And we've heard for years the importance of allowing the people of Suffolk County to vote on important environmental and budget measures. Here are two opportunities, the legislature has to let the people of Suffolk County be heard. We've heard a lot of discussion and debate, and we're hopeful that the legislature will move these forward. I mean, this is the basis of democracy. Let the people be heard. Let the people vote.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, to be facing this crisis, something mankind hasn't faced in over 100 years, right? I mean, the last major pandemic that I'm aware of was 1919, and here we are. The world is so different. Things have changed so much, and trying to figure out in this environment how the world works today. How do we get through this? Again, make the common sense decision that I think we all wish all elected officials made across the country, but here in Suffolk County in the state of New York, the decision was made to prioritize human life over revenues. And now, you have to get to the point where you figure out how do we get through the revenue side of things also. So, I guess just one follow-up question on all of this, So let's say the county legislature says, okay, yeah, we want these measures to go forward. We'll let the voters decide. And the voters then decide that they do want to do this. I mean, where's the risk there? I mean, is there some sort of, is there something I'm not seeing maybe? Because again, I just keep defaulting back to what a common sense solution this seems to be. So I don't understand, where the resistance would be if there is resistance.
Well, I mean, I don't think that it's not any more complicated than you and I have discussed. There is no secret or concern. It's very direct This is America. It's a democracy. When the people speak, that decision is final. We are hearing some comments saying that people are, quote, philosophically opposed to changing the way we fund open space, which is a little bit disappointing. But we're hopeful at the end of the day, given the fact that we know other measures are going to result in reductions in services, people will have some common sense and say, you know what, this is a no-brainer, no negative impact to the environment, no negative impact on our workforce. These are the types of things we can all get behind. We're not asking elected officials to make the decisions themselves. All we're asking them to do is let the people decide. It's nothing really more complicated than that. And recognize that in addition to the types of measures that the legislature's nonpartisan budget review office had been recommending, we're also facing the possibility of significant losses of services. I mean, the county funds all sorts of services through contract agencies, domestic violence services, drug abuse counseling for the opioid epidemic, all of our investments in law enforcement. These are things that are critically important to the quality of life in Suffolk County, which has been high. Our crime rate is down. We have a battle that we're fighting against opioid addiction. We want to constantly be helping victims of domestic violence. These are important services that will be negatively impacted if we don't find ways to replace revenue that we've lost as a result of COVID-19. This is a dire circumstance. Things will only get more difficult after this. We should vote to put these measures on the ballot and move on to the more difficult issues ahead of us.
Yeah, I would say just putting it in terms of priority. Like I said, wanting our government to prioritize human life over revenue, I see that as common sense. Saying I have a philosophical disagreement with how we do or don't fund a particular fund over, human life, health and safety, these services that you're talking about, services that AME members provide, services that contract agencies provide, all of the public safety functions in the county. I mean, there are so many things that could be impacted over maybe a handful of individuals saying, I prefer if we funded this in a different way. That's not prioritizing health and safety. That's not prioritizing, in my estimation, that's not prioritizing the people of Suffolk County. Give them the option. Let them make the decision. I read these bills. The language going on the ballot is pretty clear and easily understood. So, it's not. You also can't say, well, we don't know if people understand what they're voting on. I'm pretty sure they do. And I think they knew what they were voting on last time. And so things have changed significantly enough in the world for us to say, for 3 years, maybe we need to do things different. Rather than just leaving piles of resources that are desperately needed just sitting there gathering dust, let's use these resources during the crisis. And let's revisit this in 3 years when everything just folds back to the way it was.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And, the important thing here is allowing the people, the voters of Suffolk County, to have some say in how we go about dealing with the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic is an exercise in their democratic right and democratic principles. Is what America is built on. And so, we're extremely hopeful that the legislature will move forward at pace and authorize these bills and to put these ballot measures before the voters. The thing is that, these are steps that they need to take quickly in order to ensure that the measures can get on the ballot in November. So we continue to work cooperatively with the members of the legislature in the hope that they'll see fit to advance these measures.
Yeah, there is a timeliness to this. So, and I just want to fall back to something we were talking about earlier because I think this is also very important for people to keep on their minds. Suffolk County is a donor county. The taxation that everybody pays, we take more of that and give that to the state of New York than we get back from the state of New York. And we take more of that and give that to the federal government than we get back from the federal government. And at a time like this, to ask for just a percentage back, right? We're not talking something obnoxious and obscene, but, maybe 10%, right? If we can get the federal government to return resources to this area that we have been sending for decades in excess of what we use. And similarly on the state level, if we can get Albany to send some resources or maybe pull back on some unfunded mandates, there's a lot that could be done here. But I think really the focus right now has to be on the federal level, ensuring that our representatives know that they hear from us and that they can say with conviction when the time comes for them to take a vote one way or the other as to whether or not we're going to get funding, that yes, I've heard from my constituents. I've heard from many of them from many walks of life, and this is a priority for our area. I think that is going to be a very important component on top of these other common sense measures that we're talking about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, the governor and the county executive have it exactly right. It's the federal government that has to step up here, particularly in the wake of the elimination of our ability to deduct state and local taxes. The amount of money that is taken by the federal government out of our region, the imbalance is greater than it's ever been before. And this is the one area in which it's just clear the federal government needs to step up, needs to support state and local government, and by extension the taxpayers. Otherwise, the burden of funding this response will fall on the very people who helped us, the emergency responders, the public health nurses, local taxpayers. That just wouldn't be fair.
No, I completely agree. And Peter, I just want to thank you I know, you've got a lot on your plate, so carving out some time this morning to speak to us, I really appreciate it.
Dan, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, we'll see you next week.